joining is Carol Killian on accordion. Killian with one L and accordion with an O at the end. So I got it correct on both accounts. And I'm ready for the spelling bee. So Carol is part of the Thursday group here, the big band, which I just finally was able to see this week. It's fabulous, the amount of great things going on here. And we connected through both church and dance, and then I found out she played accordion, and I said, yippee, let's do some cello. We did this first piece in church a while back, the first piece, Because He Lives, and then, of course, on piano, the famous or infamous Jay.
On with the show. part of the program, we're having some hymns or gospel songs, however you want to term them. Uh-oh.
So there was a hymn gospel writer by the name of Fanny Crosby, and most of you know the story. When she was less than a year old, she had a treatment that went haywire and she went deaf. And she never found herself in a position where she did not love and appreciate what God had done for her despite that. She wrote thousands of hymns. And this was one of the hymns, and there was a story that she was, of course, did not have a lot of money, and she was looking for a little bit of money to continue, and somebody knocked on the door and gave her some money. And that led to her writing this piece of music, All the Way My Savior Leads Me. And it's a beautiful piece when you're living your life and you're having changes. Notice how I tape all my music together so I don't have to turn too many pages. This piece was written by a man from Brooklyn who just was commenting on the book of Revelation, where there is a river that flows from the throne of God. I call this a paraphrase because the melody does not stay all the way through, but the river flows all the way through, and it's changing on its way. So that was kind of my idea when I wrote this arrangement. Also, I'm going to introduce the next piece. I heard a piece on the public radio that was written by Dvorak, and it was played by a brother and a sister, Gil and Orly Shaham. I don't know if you've heard of them, but a violinist and a pianist. And I said, I have got to get an arrangement of that. Sorry about this. Get an arrangement of that for cello and piano. And sure enough, I did find an arrangement. So this is one of the pieces that they played on the recording. I forget what they called it. Something for two. That is, two players. Room. It's called Romantic Peace by Dvorak. Oh, this is a funny story. Dvorak came to the United States because he was invited to come by a wealthy philanthropist woman in New York City to help train American composers to write using American themes rather than copying the European. So that's what he did. But he got a little lonesome for his Czech folk and found that a little place in Iowa called Spillville had a Czech community. And then, so when we visited there, I did, my wife and I, several times, and there was a place called the Turkey River, and he would walk along the Turkey River and he'd write his famous American string quartet. But he went up to St. Paul, and obviously a few Czech people in St. Paul, and he was at Minnehaha Falls. And he was inspired to write one of his sonatinas by the falls, and he didn't have anything to write on. He wrote on his cuff the music that was, and we also have played that piece, Sonja and I, so anyway, sort of off the cuff.
We're gonna miss you.
I'll miss you too, Carol.
I know there's waterfalls in the story, but we're not gonna start waterfalls yet.
All right.